Well, we're all set today, and Kathy Glenn is supposed to be helping out. She's gonna come in at 7:30 tonight, and she's gonna be helping to take over, so she'll be making phone calls to people. She has the list for November with her, so I do not know right now. Maybe we can make an announcement at the end if she needs a few more people.
Okay. Peggy or Barbara, anything about museum staffing or anything like that? Okay. With that, Jeanette.
Now tonight I'm very pleased to welcome my favorite history professor, Dr. Gary Highlander, whom we've had the pleasure of hearing before. He is a former history professor at Electoral College and is a much sought after speaker by not only historical societies but universities and other groups. His program tonight is on Hamilton and the nation's money. Hamilton is hot. As you know, the play is it here already in Boston? I know it's coming. And he is no longer the most neglected of the founding fathers. Today we remember Hamilton as the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, who brilliantly forged the financial and economic institutions that turned America in today's modern capitalistic superpower. Will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Hudson?
Here we are again, once again together, and thank you for inviting me, and sir, that Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, we're quite proud of your reporting skills, right down to a tenth of a cent. So you're hired. You're on the staff, and so tonight, what I'd like to do, I know that Hamilton is in our wallets. But at the end of our conversation, I hope to be able to put him in your hearts just a little bit. And the reason that Alexander Hamilton, what has been in AAA ball or AA ball for so long, and as I wrote to you, a neglected founding father, is that he was outlived 20 or 25 years by Jefferson and Adams. And both Jefferson and Adams loathed Alexander Hamilton. So they had more than 2 decades to pound his reputation into the ground. But he's hot, and the play has revived an interest and the very important position that Alexander Hamilton played, as the nation's first money man. He paid the nation's bills. At the end of his term, the country was finally solvent. So I'd like to be able to spend some time, talking about Alexander Hamilton, his financial programs, his enemies, the ire that he aroused. And I want to say this on behalf of Hamilton: in no way would he ever want to be on Mount Rushmore. That had no interest for him as far as he was concerned, and I'm quoting him directly here. And I said, Mr. Hamilton, you ought not say that too often, and I only share it with the good people of Hudson, because I know that they're tight-lipped. And Alexander Hamilton, and this is Hamilton, democracy is a poison. That people of merit, of ambition, of training, show me your resume. Show me your resume. What have you done? I don't want to know your mother's maiden name, or what your zip code is, or what your dialing area is. What have you done? What have you accomplished? Show me something. Alexander Hamilton, that meritocracy carries everything. So let's bring him back to, Philadelphia. Let's bring him to Philadelphia in 1787, and I'll be very brief here. We're talking about Hamilton, the nation's money man. That at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and I think we may have talked about that a little bit, but I want to refresh your memory. A good teacher always repeats himself or herself. You guys know that. If you're in the business, it's all about repetition, isn't it? And I'm in the business. I like to give the business too. The Hamilton, at the end of the day, was the only delegate remaining at the table to represent New York. And the reason for that is that James Madison and others, George Washington, had made a bold proposal And the bold proposal was that we take the present Constitution, which really wasn't a Constitution, but we'll call it a Constitution, for the sake of presentation, to take the nation's first Constitution, which came at the end of the American Revolution, and it was called the Articles of Confederation. And it had many, many flaws, many, many blemishes that we're not going to inventory this evening. But they were not supposed to write a brand new system of government. Their job at Philadelphia was to take the present Articles of Confederation and redraft them to make them stronger. But the agreement was around the room, and Madison led the charge. Madison led the conversation that the Articles of Confederation are unworkable. They cannot be repaired. Let's put them through the shredder and start all over again. They had no authority to do that whatsoever. And of the 55 delegates who gathered, 16 went home. We're not supposed to do this. We're going to get in trouble. And the only delegate still at the table, representing the interests of the brand new state of New York, was Alexander Hamilton. He was the only one there. And Hamilton made 3 bold recommendations when it came to drafting the language for the presidency of the United States. Article 2, combining the ceremonial duties of a king with the executive authority of a prime minister. This was brand new, and many questions surfaced about the nature of this office and the powers and so forth. And Hamilton asked for the floor. And Hamilton was an engaging speaker, a vigorous speaker, a confident man, and he made 3 recommendations about the presidency. 1, that whomever it is, and they all knew it was going to be Washington. They all knew that, and he didn't want the job. And back then, anyone who raised their hand, that's not the person you want for office. That person wants money, patronage, power, a chapter in a history book. The person who says, please, not me, anybody but me, that's your guy. That's your guy. And Hamilton, and they all knew that Hamilton was talking about George Washington. He had served Washington during the American Revolution. That he'd been his right-hand man, during the Revolution. I mean, at the age of 22, Alexander Hamilton had been Washington's chief of staff. And Hamilton rising and making the recommendation that whomever we elect as president, he should be elected for life. Life, sir. Mr. Hamilton, sir, life. That sounds like monarchy. Indeed, we need to straighten things out in this country. We're going to, he didn't say this, I'll say it for him, hell in a handbasket. I mean, even George Washington had made the observation. The idea that we're a united country, and this is the word he used, not me, is a farce. Elected for life with absolute veto power. If he says no, it's no. And thirdly, to get some order here, that this new president appoint every state governor so that we have top to bottom coordination. Appointed for life, absolute veto, and appoint every state governor. That's the way to get this country moving again. And he was alone. For life, sir. And who's going to elect him? I don't care how we work this out, as long as it's not the people. The people know nothing. Nothing. They will vote for the person who promises them the most. That's why Hamilton would never want to be on Mount Rushmore. He's very happy tonight on a $10 bill. And the next time you pull out a $10 bill and take a look at that wonderful portrait, what a handsome man. Good-looking man on the cover of GQ. Good-looking man. Catnip to women. I always like using that phrase when I can. And the fact that he was married, well, we can navigate that. We can work around that from time to time. And Hamilton, with the close of the convention and drafting and the article and the Constitution signed, and the only one to sign from New York, then the Constitution had to be sold. And Hamilton, in selling the Constitution, working with John Jay and working with James Madison, wrote the most brilliant political treatise in the history of the United States. That if you take a course in political science, it is required reading. Maybe not all of it, but to piece your way through parts of it. And I'm talking about the Federalist Papers. And in the Federalist Papers, and Hamilton wrote the very first essay in the Federalist Papers. There were 85 of them. And just read Federalist number 1. There's your homework. Read Federalist number 1. Read the first paragraph. And in that first paragraph, in an invitational way, Hamilton, writing to the country, writing to New York, and writing to the country, that I urge you to read carefully this new Constitution. And this will be the solution to our problems under a decentralized, disoriented, poorly financed government that we've inherited at the end of the Revolution. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And if one ever takes a course, and I know this sounds like an oxymoron, but if anyone ever takes a course in American intellectual history, you see, it's always European intellectual history. But if one takes a course in American intellectual history, you must read, not all, but parts of, if you do it with me anyway, parts of the Federalist Papers. It's all there. And what are they? A very careful explanation of what this document is all about, why it will solve many of our problems, and why we did what we did at Philadelphia. In many ways, it's a How to Do It series. It's how we wired up the Constitution. And the 3 basic principles of the Constitution, how they will work together, how they will blend, how they will complement each other. Checks and balances. When's the last time you heard that phrase, huh? Checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism, a sharing of power between the federal government and the states. It's all there. And it helped to bring about the ratification of the Constitution, not just in New York, but across the colony, across the nation as well. This was required reading. I mean, you think about that generation taking on the British Empire, the mightiest empire since Rome, and all the consequences that might bring. And then a few years later, ripping up the Articles, a states' rights document, and recreating, in many ways, a type of government that they just rebelled away from. A distant and powerful government in New York, wherever that godforsaken place was. And if you live in Georgia, in New York, the financial capital of the country, and also a strong chief executive who looked like, sounded like, and quacked like a king. And Washington knew that. And that's why he was very careful when he was sworn in April of 1789 to wear civilian clothes. He had ordered from New Haven, Connecticut, a brown 3-piece suit that he wore with great dignity. And I am not a military man. I'm not showing up in a uniform. And the only concession to being commander-in-chief, and this was simply ceremonial, he wore a small dagger on his side. That's all. That was just a token as being commander-in-chief. It's what every well-dressed man wore, a small dagger. Weren't those great days, huh? Right? You walk into Sunday service and you got a dagger, on your belt. Don't mess with me. So Hamilton at the end of the war retires to New York and resumes his law practice. But let's get him to New York from the Caribbean. Let's talk about Hamilton, the young man, before we talk about Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury. And by the way, you're reporting for work tomorrow morning? Your name's already been passed. John Adams, who loathed Hamilton, loathed him, referred to him constantly as the bastard brat of a Scottish peddler. The bastard brat of a Scottish peddler. Born without benefit of clergy, born out of wedlock. His mother, Rebecca, was a woman of, I'll be kind, a woman of easy virtue. She gave gifts, all right? gifts of herself, a woman of easy virtue. And Alexander Hamilton, was very much like a character, right from a Dickens novel. Pretty much a street kid, pretty much on his own, by the age of 12 or 13, and worked as a bean counter, as an accountant, he kept the books for a group of British businessmen in the West Indies. And Hamilton was brilliant. I mean, he could do all the monetary conversions between Portuguese money and Dutch money and British money and so forth. He had the conversions in his head. He kept the figures. What is this? He kept the figures. He was their money man. And they were astounded. He was brilliant. He was a genius. There are three geniuses during the American Revolution. Don't tell John Adams I did not include him. All right, there are three geniuses: Hamilton, Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And Hamilton was a genius, a monetary genius. And for Alexander Hamilton, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about the bottom line. It's all about the quarterly report. And Hamilton was so good. He's 13, 14, 17, 18. And these men had no problem, leaving him in control of the business when they holidayed, when they spent the holidays in England, because they knew that he's making money and everything's in place. And at some point, they said, Alex, you need a degree. You need to be credible. And as in gratitude to you, we are going to send you to the colonies. And he eventually attended Columbia. He first went to Princeton, what became Princeton. And when he spoke with, I'm going to make this up, I don't know if there was any dean of admissions, but whomever brought in new students, and Alexander Hamilton having a letter of recommendation from these three prominent West Indian businessmen, and the dean reviewing the curriculum with him and telling him, well, as a freshman, you have to take this, this, and this as prerequisites to sophomore and junior. And Hamilton, wait a minute, prerequisites? I'm a man in a hurry. How many years? 4 years? I don't have time for this. I'm 18 years old. I'm a man in a hurry. So he went over to Columbia, and he said, I can do this curriculum in 2 years. Sir, I can do this in 2 years. I don't need all these prerequisites. I can figure this out. And he did. And he graduated, and he got caught up in the war. And that's where he met Aaron Burr, who's going to do him in, and where he came to the attention of Washington. You see, when the Continental Army decamped from Cambridge, and they made their way down to New York in 1776, for as Washington was convinced, the only battle of the American Revolution. And he was introduced to Hamilton, or the name Hamilton was introduced to him, that this is a fellow you might want to interview and talk to. He's brilliant. He can be your chief of staff. He can do the money. He can do the food. He can do the ordinances. And Washington, just taken aback by the skill and how suave and debonair that Hamilton was. When Hamilton left school, he studied law, and he was told, well, you need to study under an attorney, a seasoned attorney. This might take years for you. He said, I don't have that time. Give me the books. And he did, and he studied up, and he passed his law course and was admitted to the bar after 3 months of study. That's him. I can do this. I don't need to go to school. I can do this. I can figure this out. It's all common sense, you see. So very quickly being drawn into the circle of Washington. And for Washington, here's the son I never had. And for Hamilton, Hamilton knew, I've got Washington's number. He likes me, and I think the two of us can go far. So at the end of the Revolution, Hamilton returns to his law practice and winds up representing New York at the Constitutional Convention. And with the ratification of the Constitution, George Washington asks that he serve as Secretary of the Treasury. There's no language whatsoever in the Constitution for a cabinet at all. And when Hamilton took a look at, not Hamilton, when Washington took a look at the job description, said, I can't do this by myself. I'm going to need help. And I'm going to need help at Treasury, Hamilton, and Hamilton reporting for duty, sir. My honor to serve you again, Your Excellency. And Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, and Knox as Secretary of War, and I gave you Mr. Edward Randolph as Attorney General. You know, at one time, the entire cabinet could meet, debate, and discuss at McDonald's or Starbucks and just sit around the table and get it all done. And Hamilton, because he's Hamilton, had the largest staff. He had 40 people working for him, and that was huge. The executive department at the time, before the cabinet was set up, had 2 people in it, Washington and Adams, and now there are 6, you know, with 4 cabinet positions. This was a government run on the shoestring. It was broke, and Hamilton was the money man. And for Hamilton, we need to make the country solvent. For Hamilton, we need to get back on good terms with Great Britain. And for Hamilton, we need to be once again part of the global economy, or at least the Atlantic economy of Great Britain. We need to get back on good terms. We need to be able to borrow from the Bank of England, the mightiest financial institution on the globe. And we need to let bygones be bygones. That's Hamilton. A great phrase from Hamilton: a nation has permanent interests, not permanent allies. Hold that thought when he throws the French under the bus. And that's going to get him in big trouble. Well, that's going to be part of John Adams's problem with Hamilton as well. Hamilton, a mover and a shaker. Let's not be sentimental about anything. It's the bottom line. It's money. It's getting this country solvent again. There are 3 major reports that are issued from the desk of Alexander Hamilton. A report on public credit, a report on banking, and a report on manufacturing. And this became these 3 reports became the basis of his work at Treasury until he resigned. And he resigned because he could not stand being in the same room with Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson resigned as well. He could not stand being in the same room with Alexander Hamilton. They both had egos. And Hamilton was one of these guys. And we never liked people like this. He was always right. And that's why John Adams didn't like it, because John Adams said, I'm always right. And so we don't get that. We don't get that, you know, that tension, you know, in the history of the nation. We don't get that tension. We get a sense that everybody was a gentleman and that everybody listened to one another and they agreed. And good point, Mr. Adams. However, have you considered this? Good point, Mr. Jefferson. Have you considered this? These were argumentative men. They were difficult, they were opinionated, they were ego-driven, and they were right. And Washington, who, by the way, was not the sharpest knife in the drawer, he wasn't. He had the wisdom to listen, to adjudicate, because at the end of the day, they appealed to him. With the blessing of Washington, things happened. Report on public credit, report on a national bank, and report on manufacturing. Report on public credit. Hamilton, and he knew. There was some talk that what we ought to do as a brand new country in 1789, that we should zero out all our debt. We owe money. You know, we owe money to nations that had loaned us money during the war, principally the Dutch and to some extent the French. And we also owe money, you know, to those citizens who had bought war bonds and to support the war. And there are some who are urging us to simply walk on that debt. You know, that debt was contracted by the Continental Congress, which is now defunct. They're not answering the phone, they're out of business, and they've been replaced by the United States of America. And there were some who were saying, walk on the debt. Let's zero everything out, and let's start fresh, let's start anew. and Hamilton in the report on public credit, that's not the way to look at it. If you do that, we will not be able to secure loans from the British or the Dutch. And we need to be able to borrow money. We need to be able to borrow money from the Bank of England and get back on good terms with them. We need to pay our debt. And we owe, today it's pocket money. You could probably find it out in the parking lot. Bring your flashlight. We owe $54 million. $54 million. I mean, that's what a pen and pencil set costs today, when the government pays for it. And we need to pay these debts down. The states owe money. The states also have borrowed money from European bankers. And the states have issued war bonds. And here's Hamilton. If we nationalize the debt, in other words, the federal government will take on the debt. We'll take on the, you might be thinking, where's it going to get the money? I'm going there. That we'll take on the debt of the states who borrowed money. And we'll take on the debt of the states that issued war bonds to nationalize the debt. And if we nationalize the debt, and I will make the federal government responsible for the debt, that will tie the wealthy to the country. You know, those people who look to the federal government as perhaps the new game in town. I'll tie in the wealthy to the government. I'll tie in the people, these farmers who ponied up $10, $15, $20 to buy a war bond, and they think that war bond will never be, it'll never be cashed, it'll never be honored. But if the federal government will pick up that debt, and the word is to nationalize the debt for the states and the monies that they had borrowed from European bankers and the war bonds that they had issued, that will tie the country together. We need to pay the debt down, the full faith and credit of the United States of America. And he had two plans for that. So think of it this way. Think of the assumption plan. Now, rather, think of the report on public credit. And then parenthetically, there were two boxes under the report on federal credit, and we need to check them both. One was called the assumption plan. We assume the debt of all the states. And the other one was called the funding plan, that we will fund the monies due to farmers, whomever, farmers and bricklayers and blacksmiths who put up money for the American Revolution. We're going to fund that, and we're going to assume the debts of the states to tie the nation together. Now, the assumption plan passed easily in Congress. What state governor wouldn't want his debts paid? Now, that was easy. The funding plan is what really bothered Madison and Jefferson. Because what had happened after the war, there were speculators, sharpies, who moved among the farmers and the blacksmiths and the shoemakers and so forth, and said, we're in a depression after the war, and I'm willing to, you have a $10 war bond, I'll give you $1. I'll pay you $1 on that $10 war bond, maybe $2. I'll assume the risk. You know this new government is going to walk on it. You know that, don't you? And the debt is due, the mortgage is due. You know they're going to walk on it. And for $1, for $2, I'll take it off your hands. The funding plan was blocked by Madison and Jefferson because they both believed that this was not fair, that speculators had now assumed the risk of these war debts, and that these good farmers and good blacksmiths were taken advantage of because they needed the money now. And it was blocked. It was blocked. And for Hamilton, it's a package. This report on public credit is a package, assumption plan and funding plan. How do I get over this? How do I pull Madison in? How do I pull Jefferson in? How do I persuade them this is the right thing to do? So there's a dinner party. What a surprise. There's a dinner party in New York, the first capital. Madison loathed New York. He loathed it. I can't cross the street here without getting run over. I get spattered with mud. I can't even order a meal. I don't know the head waiters. I don't know the maitre d'. Hamilton knew them all. Hamilton could get a table anytime, anywhere. He knew them all. He was connected. He was a piece of work. He was lightning in a bottle. And Hamilton, gentlemen, I'd like to host a dinner. and perhaps we can discuss our differences. And there's a wonderful essay. It's called The Dinner. And what Hamilton does, he pitches Madison. Sir, I know you loathe New York. Mr. Jefferson, sir, I know you loathe New York. I am quite at home here. In fact, I wrote those lyrics for Frank Sinatra. I'm just waiting for him to show up, you know, and put his voice to them. And where is he? He's in New Jersey somewhere. And what Hamilton does, he pitches Jefferson. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could move the capital, you know, to an area that's more convenient to you and Mr. Madison from Virginia? Wouldn't that be wonderful? That you wouldn't have to travel as far and deal with these cold, muddy, vile winters in New York. And wouldn't it be wonderful, Mr. Madison, that you could go home for lunch and Dolly, I know she's half your age, you know, and wouldn't it be great to slip home for lunch? Wouldn't it? You miss her, don't you? Mr. Jefferson, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to slip down to Monticello? We all know your secret. You know, we all know all those very light-skinned young boys and girls running around with coffee-colored skins and red hair are your children with Sally Hemings. And wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to just slip down to Monticello from time to time during the week, or maybe for lunch, maybe for an early dinner, and surprise Dusty Sally. That was her nickname, Dusty Sally. I'll tell you what I'll do. I know you loathe New York, and I know the old man likes me, and I'll persuade him to move the capital from New York to Washington if you guys will support me. If you guys will give up your resistance and pull in enough votes for the funding program, I'll get the old man to move the capital. Now, Hamilton had a hidden agenda here. We're going to move the capital to a swamp. It's a swamp. It will be inaccessible. And that was wonderful for Hamilton. And keep the people away from the capital. You know what happens when people have access to the capital? I'll tell you what happens. It's going on right now in France with the French Revolution. They've seized the Bastille, a prison. They've armed themselves. They've seized the king and queen. I tell you, when the people get mixed up in things, they don't know what's good for them. He didn't say that to Madison or Jefferson. We're going to put it in a swamp. We're going to keep the people away. And now he's going back live with Madison and Jefferson. And it'll be a nice southern spin, you know, to the language at the Capitol. It'll slow down. It'll be a nice drawl. And it won't be that high-clipped Bostonese and that Brooklynese, that Queensese. Everybody sounding like they... I said I wanted mustard, not mayonnaise. The deal is done. The assumption plan is passed. Now, I've got money coming in. We have money coming in. We have money coming in from land sales. And we have money coming in from tariffs. But Hamilton will soon discover he needs more money. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. The second plan. Report on a national bank. I'm the Secretary of the Treasury. And if I'm going to pay down the nation's bills, and now we've assumed the debts of the states, and we've assumed the debts of the war bonds, I need a national bank. I need a bank to do the nation's business. And that caused a huge uproar. You see, the first uproar was not over slavery at all. I mean, everyone knew that was a dark bargain. And that did not come, well, it came up at the Constitutional Convention, but not to the extent that it would save it would prevent Southern slaveholders from accepting the Constitution. And that's another conversation for another evening. I need a national bank. And they're having a meeting at Dunkin' Donuts. And Hamilton's got a plan for a national bank. And he presents it to Washington. And Jefferson is there. And the problem is that there is no language. There's no language in the Constitution that provides for a national bank. There's no language. And when the proposition is made, it's Jefferson who very quickly defends the fact that we cannot play fast and loose with the language of the Constitution. We can't do that. The Anti-Federalists who tried to block the adoption of the Constitution because it was too powerful, too strong, too dangerous. It looked like a Parliament and the King again. We cannot take a broad view of the Constitution. We can only do whatever the Constitution says we can do. And Your Excellency, General Washington, I submit that Mr. Hamilton here, sir, Mr. Hamilton, can very well do the nation's business in state banks. The Bank of New York, which you created, Mr. Hamilton. By the way, it's still trading on the stock market this morning. And Aaron Burr, the Bank of Manhattan. I mean, these guys, they clashed. You can do the nation's business through state banks. And Hamilton, I cannot. I'm the Secretary of the Treasury. I want my checking account 0001 and a tracking number and a place for me to sign my name and the nice background on the check, maybe the background of the Potomac or the background of the Hudson River, wherever we're at here, or the East River. I need a national bank. Jefferson, it is not provided for in the Constitution. It is not an expressed power written out. If you begin to play fast and loose with the Constitution this early on, you are going to play into the hands of the enemies of the Constitution, those who opposed it. They were called Anti-Federalists, and all hope will be lost. And Hamilton, and Mr. Jefferson, actually sitting over here. Thank you for the end posts. Mr. Jefferson, with all due respect, sir, he loathed him too. You know, you know when you have to be polite to someone and you don't want to? You know, you really want to bite him right on the nose. You know, Mr. Jefferson, sir, there is language, sir, that provides for a national bank. And Your Excellency, Mr. President, may I remind you that Thomas Jefferson was not at Philadelphia. He was in Paris. God knows what he was doing in Paris. I can only imagine. And that was under his breath, I'm sure. He wasn't there, sir. You were there, I were there. And in any meeting, sir, you know that there were understandings, you know, winks, nods, glances. That's how things get done. Oftentimes you don't have to say it. You just look, don't you? Teachers have looks. That's how you run a class, with your look, your voice, your presence. A wife has a look, right? The look. Right? You've had 3 beers. She doesn't have to say that. That's the look. See, I have the 3-minute look and the 5-minute look. At a party, if you're with me, and I give you a quick look, know what the look means? Get the coats. We're going. I got a better place to hang out. I'll give you the 3-minute look, or I'll give you the 5-minute look. But the look is, I'm done. I want to leave. Would you please get the coats? Darling, we're leaving. There's a better game in town somewhere. Everybody has the look. Hamilton to Jefferson. There is language. And I submit, sir, you were not there. And there are, hear me well, there are implied powers in the Constitution, implied. And picture with me Hamilton getting out his copy of the Constitution and looking through Article 1, the express powers, and reading them for Washington. Let's pretend that we have, there's nothing to read, that we have the express power written out to coin money, regulate its value. I have the power to tax, to pay down the nation's bills, to fund an army and a navy. How can I do that? Working with 3 or 4 checkbooks. We do have the authority for a national bank. And he went right to the last paragraph, right to the last phrase in that section of the Constitution. And you can check me on this. It's right there. You can find it tonight. That's another bit of homework. You know, that right at the end where they list all the expressed powers of the Congress, what it can do. There's a phrase here. It's a wonderful act of anticipation, wonderful language. I'm going to read it to you. Here it is. Here it is. The Congress may do whatever is, here's the phrase, necessary and proper to carry out the above expressed powers. Necessary and proper. And Your Excellency, I submit to you, sir, with all due respect, for me to tax, to us to regulate the value of our currency, to pay the nation's bills, to fund an army and a navy, to provide for internal improvements. I believe, sir, it is both necessary and proper that I have a national bank to do the nation's business. The room was silent. Can't you hear it? Absolute silence. And I can see Washington getting up and putting his arm around Alex. You're my guy. You are my guy. That's why I hired you, to run my army in 1776. That was brilliant, Alex. I know. Thank you, sir. Can't you see him closing his briefcase and walking out of Dunkin' Donuts and just giving Jefferson a look? Got you again, babe. I got you again, because you finally figured out about this capital change, haven't you? I got you, and I got you again. So we have a national bank in Hamilton. I got a routing number, 0001, and I sign off. Secretary of the Treasury. At 32, the youngest Secretary of the Treasury ever. Brilliant. But he's not done yet. A report on manufacturing. And this is where it really gets nasty. Hamilton, we need to industrialize. We have enough farmers. We do not need any more eggs and chickens. We have enough farmers. And we need to industrialize. We need bankers, and we need automobiles and computers and steel and iron ore. I made some of that up. But we need to industrialize. We need to bark with the big dogs so we can participate fully in Britain's global economy. We must do this. We have enough farmers. And Jefferson, the nation does not need industry. Industry, the runoff from the tanneries, the textile mills, the mines, it pollutes the water, it pollutes the air. Leave industry in Europe. I would rather this country pay more on tariffs in imported goods than to despoil the air and the water. That any American should be able to take his or her tin cup and to go to any brook, any stream, the Assabet River, and dip into it. And the water is cold, clean, and refreshing and nourishing. And to leave the runoff in Europe where it belongs, where people are piled up in apartments and work in textile mills. It's no accident, sir. It's no accident that Adam and Eve were born in the Garden of Eden and not a textile mill. The Lord is a farmer. He harvests corn and souls. And can you see, Hamilton, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? The Garden of Eden, that's a story. Are you kidding me? We need to industrialize. Farmers. Alexander Hamilton could not tell the difference between an egg and a potato. He ate out. I know every maitre d'. Who needs farmers? Farmers? They get up at daybreak, and you know what the top of their day is? They all march down to the chicken coop and count out how many eggs Clara laid. Are you kidding me? We need to industrialize. And in order to do that, the government must adopt a protective tariff to protect our, and this is the phrase he used, our infant industries. We cannot yet compete on an open market with the British or the Portuguese or the Spanish. Many of their startup costs, they've been absorbed. And we need a protective tariff so Europe doesn't dump its stuff on our shoreline, so that we can get our infant industry stabilized and up and running and to begin to bark with the big dogs. This is talk about the road not taken. Today, Hamilton, we are a Hamiltonian nation, not a Jeffersonian nation. And maybe why that's the $2 bill is considered unlucky. Hamilton was everywhere. He had a plan for everything, and he made many, many enemies. And we're going to find out shortly how he made an enemy out of Aaron Burr. And it wound up doing him in, not Aaron Burr, but Alexander Hamilton. So we have these three reports. And Hamilton, we need more revenue. If we're going to pay down the assumption and funding plan, we need more revenue. And he proposed to Washington to raise money, a tax on liquor, a tax on whiskey. It's easy, isn't it, for the legislature today to up the tax on spirits, not on wine and beer, because that's everybody's beverage, you see. But to raise taxes on spirits, to raise taxes on tobacco, to raise taxes on marijuana, boy, can I editorialize here for a minute? That was an irresponsible vote, I think, to legalize that stuff. It's a gateway for youngsters. That was irresponsible to do that. Shame on voters. I can see where kids would do that. They don't know any better. But adults know better. And that was irresponsible. I'm done editorializing. That's just me. That's just me. And I gave it to my sons, too. They heard it. That, my boys, was an irresponsible vote. That was in your face. And your old man didn't support it. And he still doesn't. They hear it from me. They get it from me. That's okay. I'm Papa Bear. They know that. Here comes Papa Bear again. And watch out. He's growling. He's growling. There's a bear in the woods, and he's growling. We need to raise money on liquor. And I propose a whiskey tax. And the tax is passed. And when Hamilton, this is pure Hamilton, taking advantage of an opportunity, when the revenue agents went out to collect the taxes from the farmers out in western Ohio, not Ohio yet, but western Pennsylvania and so forth, maybe Kentucky. There's stills running. This is how they made a buck on the side. Or this was currency. Whiskey was currency. Whiskey was money. Whiskey, you could sell it and make money. And now Hamilton, that fat cat Hamilton, helping his rich friends again. He only helps his rich friends. These tariffs, we're going to have to pay more for imported goods now. He only helps his fat cat friends. So when Hamilton's revenue agents showed up, and here they come, Ebenezer, I see them, Herbert, I see them, Chandler, here they come. Are you locked, loaded, and ready? Yes, sir, here they come. Boom, boom, bang, 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 bang. And they drove them away. And they showed up back in Hamilton's office. Mr. Secretary, these farmers wouldn't pay their taxes on whiskey. They shot at us. Are you sure? This is good news. They shot at you. Are you sure? They weren't shooting at flying squirrels. No, sir. Here's my hat with a hole in it. How you doing? I'm okay. This is excellent news. I have to tell the president. So Hamilton shows up to speak to Washington. Sir? A word, sir? A moment, sir? A word? There's rebellion in the land. What? What do you mean rebellion in the land, sir? Remember that whiskey tax? Of course I do. My revenue agents went out to collect it, and they were fired upon. These farmers will not pay their taxes. There is rebellion against your government, sir. Alex, there's always a crisis with you, but I'm sure you have a plan. You always have a plan. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. Sir, may I go into your closet? Why? May I look in your closet? I'm looking for your uniform. It's in there. Hamilton, uniform? Sir, the uniform. Commander-in-Chief. Like the old days, we're going to ride together, and we're going to put down this rebellion against your lawful democratic government. Sir, the jacket. I can see him going to the front to begin to button it. Oh, sir, you've put on a few pounds since we rode together. This is the only time in American history that the commander-in-chief ever led an army into battle. And Washington rode, with thousands of militia, with Hamilton, into the hills. And can't you see Ebenezer and Herbert and Chandler and here they come again. Here they come again. It's Washington. Run for your lives. And that's the end of that. The headlines tried for treason. Now, you guys get out of here. You're going to pay your taxes? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Don't let this happen again. Have I made my point? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the whiskey tax passes, monies, and those bills get paid down. And Hamilton wants to crack the British market. And he persuades George Washington to send John Jay to England and to work out a trade deal with the British, for the British to allow us to participate fully in their global economy. And John Jay is given his instructions. Now, John Jay was not working. Well, he was, but he had a great no-show job. He was the first Supreme Court Chief Justice, and they had no work. The Supreme Court is just beginning to come online. And John Jay was a very skilled negotiator, and Washington write up his instructions. And John Jay goes to Europe. He goes, we want a deal. And the Brits said, we'll give you a deal. Here's the deal. Here's what we'll allow you to trade in our global economy and not shut you out. But here's what you want. Here's what we want from you: the quid or the pro quo, a war with France. You know, the wars of the French Revolution. And we want you to break your wartime alliance with France. And that was an alliance signed by Benjamin Franklin in perpetuity. There's very few things you do in perpetuity. And Hamilton, a nation has permanent interests, not permanent allies. And Mr. Jay, if the British ask you to break that treaty, break it, because that's the price we're willing to pay to get back into the global economy. And the deal is done. And that's part of Hamilton's package for prosperity. The French are quite upset. You've thrown us under the bus, and we're at war with Great Britain, and that's going to lead to problems for John Adams. Because when John Adams is elected president, when's the last time you heard this phrase? It shows up in a crossword puzzle from time to time. It's called the QuasiWar. You know, the QuasiWar between France and the United States, where they were picking off our trade vessels. Like a halfway war, a quasi-war. It's like being a little bit pregnant. So, I mean, I'm not quite sure how that works. But a quasi-war, the quasi-war. And Hamilton wants war with France, and John Adams doesn't. And by now, Hamilton's out of the cabinet. And what he's doing is he's working through the cabinet against John Adams. And that's part of the dislike the two of them share. You know, the bastard brat of a Scottish peddler. And Hamilton retires back to New York. And in the election of 1800, this is the first election that you and I would recognize to some extent as an election. Now, no one's putting their hand up yet. And there are no signs anywhere on any lawn in Hudson that reads Jefferson and Burr, Adams and Pinckney. You don't do that yet. But people knew there were parties and that Jefferson wanted to govern with Burr and Adams wanted to govern with Pinckney. And I'll be short here because it gets terribly convoluted. The way the electors voted when they cast their electoral votes, and they each had two, that an elector would choose two men. There are no parties, no conventions, no campaign buttons, nothing. That an elector, if I'm chosen as an elector in the election of 1800, and I'm a Virginian, and why am I chosen as an elector? One, people trust my judgment. Two, I'm aware of the problems in the country. Three, I'm aware of the available political talent in the country. And what I do, so let's pretend, it's called playing school, pretending. Let's assume I have pretty small electoral, I have two electoral ballots. And I write down the names of two men, both of whom I believe to be equally qualified to serve as president. Maybe they know each other, maybe they don't. Maybe they share the similar vision for the country, maybe they do not. But in my view, I write down two names of two men, both of whom I believe to be equally qualified to serve as president. I do not write down president or vice president, just two names. And then I close it up. I close it up. I pour my, that's annoying. And I put my sealing wax on it. And I've got my sealing wax ring, and there it is, and off it goes to be counted in 1800. And the person with the majority is the president, and the first runner-up gets the consolation prize, the vice president. And that was fine, until informal parties surfaced, and until Aaron Burr, an electoral thief, got involved. Jefferson and Burr were tied in the Electoral College. They were tied. Now, that wasn't supposed to happen, but because each elector wrote down me, Jefferson's name, and I know that Jefferson wants to work with Burr, I put Burr's name down, so they're tied. But that's okay, because Burr knows that he's number 2, doesn't he? So Jefferson, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, Aaron, congratulations, Mr. Vice President, congratulations. Excuse me? What did you call me, Mr. Jefferson? I didn't call you anything. I said, congratulations, Mr. Vice President. Aaron, don't fool around. You know you're the number 2 guy. I have no memory of that conversation. Aaron, click, Jefferson. Aaron, click. He's an electoral thief. Everything is flying around here. See, that's why I will never be allowed to give a commencement address, because I like to move around. I like to move around, and I like to be among the parents and to thank them for a paycheck and to say some other maybe irreverent things. But it would be a commencement address that people would remember. Do you know what I really want to do? I want to marry somebody. I want to be a justice of the peace for a day for $100 and to give a humdinger of a sermon. It would be memorable. I would never get another job again. Say, Gary, you didn't say you would do that. You didn't ask. It was memorable, wasn't it? Yes, it was quite memorable. Thank you. So there's a tie. And the House of Representatives has to determine who's president and vice president, because there's a dead heat, a tie. They each have 81 electoral votes. And this is where Hamilton stuck his nose in somebody else's business again. Hamilton was connected. He was connected up. And he loathed Jefferson. He loathed him. He despised Aaron Burr. So Hamilton began to work among the state delegations. Each state has one vote. So each delegation would have a vote. And Hamilton, going from delegation to delegation, Delaware, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and talking up Jefferson as the lesser of 2 evils. And on the 35th, I've lost count, the 35th, the 36th ballot, Jefferson is elected president, and Aaron Burr is number 2. Aaron Burr never forgot that, and that you stole the presidency from me. Me? You tried to steal it from Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was, so embarrassed by this. I'm Thomas Jefferson. I wrote the Declaration of Independence. I'm Thomas Jefferson. That I built the University of Virginia. I hired the faculty. I bought the books. I put together the meal plan. I'm Thomas Jefferson as governor, statute of religious toleration for Virginia. And this is happening to me? Aaron Burr will not run with him in 1804. And we know that, don't we? And then when Aaron Burr returns to New York and runs for the governorship, Hamilton begins to work his mischief again. You don't want him as governor. He's two-faced, he's a liar, he's all about himself. He's not to be trusted, Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was a likable guy. People liked Aaron Burr. They liked him a great deal. But he and Jefferson just didn't click. He and Hamilton. So when Burr lost the governorship, he blamed that, along with losing the presidency, on Hamilton. And he challenged Hamilton to a duel. Now, Hamilton had no business fighting a duel. He's a bean counter. He's a banker. He's an accountant. He's a money man. He's not a swordsman. He's not a dueler. But you've challenged my honor, the cor duello. And the irony here, the absolute irony, that must have grieved him for years, it would me as a father, that his oldest boy, Philip, had fought a duel to defend his father's name, and he lost the duel. Can you imagine a dad, my youngest, and I'll fight my own battles, and his son Philip being shot down in a duel. And Hamilton chose the very same brace of pistols. See, in case you're ever in a duel and you're challenged, you get to choose the weapons. Now, I would choose Twinkies, all right? That way no one gets hurt, you know, and you can probably only throw it 20 feet and not very accurately. That's what I would choose. And we know, don't we, that they met in Weehawken, New Jersey, and whether or not Hamilton threw his shot away, who knows, but he did, or he fired first, and Burr had made his point. And the code duello was you simply fire in the air after the other fellow was fired. But Burr didn't want to. Burr nailed him. He put a slug right in his chest, a .52 caliber chest, and he died the following day. Me, I would have run. I would have jumped in the Hudson and started swimming for New York. That's what I would have done. You know? I'm not going to stand and let that guy take a pot shot at him, but he did. You know, my honor's at stake, and he died a few hours later, and Burr fled the country. Now here's a sitting vice president. He fled the country, and he came back years later, of course. And there were no. I mean, it was a felony. It was murder. Murder one in New York and New Jersey, but it never followed up. And Burr, lived out his life in disgrace. And tonight, I'll tell you where Alexander Hamilton is tonight. He may be in your pocket. He might be in your wallet. But he's buried at the foot of Wall Street, which is perfect, isn't it? And I know in the morning he rouses himself with the morning bell at 9:30, whatever time it is, and he gets up and probably reads the Wall Street Journal and pieces his way through Forbes magazine. And with the closing bell at 4 o'clock, he settles in, and we'll see what tomorrow brings. It's the bottom line. It's the stock split. How well did we do? Democracy is a poison. A nation has permanent interests, not permanent allies. The Constitution is a flexible document with implied powers. And we know today on the present courts, it's how does one read the Constitution? Original intent. What did the words mean in 1787? So they need to mean the same words today. It has to be the same. Or is it a living Constitution? That we need to take the words from 1788 and we need to grow them and we need to make them work for 2018. And that's always a battle, isn't it? Original intent versus a living Constitution. That's the phrase, a living Constitution. And you can deal with that. So piece your way through the Federalist Papers. And if you're going to fight a duel, choose a soft weapon, a Twinkie, all right? Or maybe a bag of flour or something. All right, so before I leave, a question, an observation. We have covered a lot of ground. And we have done in about an hour, which usually takes a week and a half to do. Because when you need to move, you can move. Sometimes I'll walk in and I'll say, you got to listen fast. What do you mean listen fast? I don't do that. I don't do that. You need to massage the material. People can only absorb so much. But since you're not going to have blue books and there's no midterm, I can move it along a little bit. So there's Alexander Hamilton. And now when you pull out that $10 bill, you will know a little more about him now than you did when we first walked in. The bastard brat of a Scottish peddler. Well, now you have. That's why you came tonight. And Abigail Adams had no use for him either. Absolutely none.
How old was he when he died?
43? I think he was 43. He's a young man. And his wife lived until she was 97. Ay, ay, ay. I mean, that's in the 19th century. That's off the charts. That's 2 lives. And she spent the rest of her life defending her husband. And he left her a note. He left her a letter, that if I fail to come back, do not think less of me. I had to defend my honor as a man and as your husband. And he wrote to her, I'll look for you. He wrote to her, I will look for you in heaven. I'm paraphrasing here. I will look for you on the other side of the stars. I will wait for you, my beloved Elizabeth. And that's Alexander Hamilton. So that's the Hamilton to take home with you, and the Hamilton in your back pocket. So it looks to me like dessert is ready to go. All right, and I can't stand in the way of food. I'll see you later. All right, thank you. Thank you for your company. Oh, we got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
See you later.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I want to say something to you, sir. That check is for $300 because you never cashed your check.
Oh, I don't know what happened to it. I lost
Well,
it.
that's why he made it up for $300.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Good. See you soon.
Yeah.
I hope it held together today.
Oh, it was wonderful.
It's fun to laugh a little bit,
It sure is.
and this
People
keeps
need-
this
people need
keeps me
that.
busy.
That's right. Now, how about some coffee? or
I gotta
something?
go.
Are you sure?
I'm fine. I'm gonna run, but thank you.